Hello, everyone. This is Peter Grandich. I always remind you, this is not investment advice, so always speak to a licensed financial advisor before making any investment decision and to read my disclosures on my website. Well, since we last spoke to this gentleman, a lot of good things have been happening, and I'm glad to welcome him back. I'm speaking to Brian Ostroff, the president of Arianne Phosphate. Brian, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be back.
Well, since we last spoke, my audience is more than double, and certainly things have been happening. But before we get to the latest, since there are a lot of new people seeing this, can you just spend a few minutes possibly just explaining what the company's all about?
Sure, absolutely. So Arianne Phosphate, as the name would suggest, we are a phosphate company. We are currently developing our Lac-Apol project in Quebec, Canada. The project itself is extremely large. We've been at this quite some time. This is a little over 10 years and $100 million in the making. So in the making, what I mean is today we are the largest greenfield phosphate deposit, not owned by a major. We make a very high purity phosphate concentrate, amongst the purest in the world. And we are fully permitted, shovel ready. So just, maybe going into a little bit more depth on that. Phosphate, most widely recognized for its use in fertilizers. What is interesting is most of the world just doesn't have enough phosphate. So here in North America, we run a deficit, South America, Western Europe, a lot of areas of Asia. And so we're all reliant on imports, and those imports generally come from the Middle East and North Africa. Morocco is by far the largest, as I always say, good address, sometimes a rough neighborhood. There is also phosphate fertilizers that used to come out of China, but with the growth of the LFP business, and we'll come to that, I think, a little later on, there is less. And in terms of a good high purity phosphate, similar to what an Arianne has, really the only similar stuff is Russia, and there again is your geopolitical problem. So Arianne, again, being here in Canada, very mining friendly jurisdiction, we're ideally situated, and being fully permitted. I think, in this day and age, particularly in Western jurisdictions where it becomes harder and harder to get, I think is a huge plus. And then I guess lastly, I'll just touch on most of the infrastructure that we require is already in place. There's a hydroelectric dam 30 kilometers away, we contracted with. That's going to represent 75% of the power for our operation. So clean, green, renewable. There's a heavy duty road network already in place, heads down to the Saguenay River, where we can then ship it. So, by and large, we're in a good place. It is a very big project. So today, a couple of months ago, we had put out an updated CapEx on our project. So you're looking at about a $1.5 billion build. But at today's price, and I want to highlight, this is not 43-101, but if you were to go and take a look at our bankable feasibility study and run the math, you'd be looking at gross profits, again, at today's prices, probably somewhere north of $600 million a year. We've got a 26-year life of mine. Subsequent drilling has shown that we're pretty comfortable that we can take this to 50 years, again, not 43-101 at this time.
So since we last spoke, and I'll get to it in a second, I think you had news that would only need one hand in 40 years to see. I've seen it similar, but also people have to realize there's another big market other than fertilizer. So the news I'm speaking about is two gentlemen have joined you with tremendous background in your industry, but they joined you by taking their compensation in stock, not in money. And
Yeah,
the only way that's going to be profitable for them is they have to believe that there's a real future for the company. And I have to tell you that I can't recall many times seeing that. So can you tell us about that, who they are and what it means to the company, and also the other part of interest for phosphate going forward?
sure, absolutely. Yes, well, certainly we have had the pleasure of welcoming a couple of gentlemen to Arianne. So first, that's Rafe Sully. Rafe was the executive vice president of Nutrien, that is the world's largest traded fertilizer company. And amongst his roles at Nutrien, he was the CEO of their nitrogen and phosphate businesses. So obviously in that capacity, Rafe knows a tremendous amount about phosphate operations, what maybe the world looks like in the future. And so he came and he joined us first as an advisor. And then most recently, he did join the board. And I'll come back to maybe some of the ideas around that. And then most recently, maybe about 6 weeks, 7 weeks ago, we had another ex-Nutrien fellow join us, Mark Edinger. So Mark worked with Rafe over in their phosphate group, and he was in charge of selling the products, what Nutrien made. Now, as you had said, both of them have taken their compensation by way of options. It's not an annual salary, so I think that gives a bit of a sense of maybe what they're thinking and what the opportunities are. And with Rafe now being on the board of directors, he does have to disclose his shareholdings. And I will say that since he's joined up with Arianne, he's actually bought about 2 million shares in the open market. So, I know that phosphate is right now a little bit of a niche commodity, and a lot of viewers of this interview, do they know all the details and that and know, and certainly it's out there for them to learn. But I think the key takeaway is here are two gentlemen, obviously extremely well versed in the world of phosphate, the macro, where they see the world coming. No one put a gun to their head and said, you got to go work with Arianne. And this is something that they've done by choice. So I guess since they're getting options, you can't really view them as third-party validation. But again, at the end of the day, the fact that they come to Arianne, should give investors, I think, some comfort that guys who presumably know what they're doing have chosen Arianne. So, maybe with that, we can touch a little bit on perhaps what they see and what they believe the opportunities are for Arianne.
Yeah,
So,
I'm sorry. I think people have to understand what you would have to pay to bring people like that in the size that the company is now, to understand from the Arianne side, and what's incentivizing them. It's not a paycheck. So, and the only way they're going to see anything for their time that they're putting in is the performance in the stock. So in my mind, I don't think you could do better than that in any type of thing. I wish I can get some of the juniors are in that could find people like that for the options and bring them in. Okay. So we all know, and there's a great argument that the growth of need of general fertilizer because of food issues in the world and all is important. But the home run potential, the grand slam potential is another market. Could you just talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's the bigger of the two pieces that should interest people in the company.
Absolutely. And I think that what you're alluding to is the lithium iron phosphate battery, the LFP. And so, I'm just going to take a brief step back in essence, and I think this will explain why Arianne really has some potential. So today you can basically classify phosphate into three products. There's the material that goes into the dry bulk fertilizers, the MAP and the DAP, and that is absolutely the biggest segment of the market. The next is the quality liquids, and that's used in specialty fertilizers, hydroponics, precision ag. And lastly, there is that very top tier of purified phosphoric acid, and that's the material that goes into industrial uses, beverages, food, but also now the LFP battery, the lithium iron phosphate battery. Now, without getting into the geology of it per se, the quality of your phosphate concentrate, in other words, what comes out of your mine and gets turned into concentrate, is going to allow you to vary what products you can target. Now, that dry bulk market is a good market. The material there trades for about $600 a ton for MAP and DAP. Those good quality liquids that I'd mentioned are twice that. They're probably about $1,100-1,200 a ton. And the stuff for the PPA, the purified phosphoric acid, is about $2,500 a ton. Now, at the end of the day, what you would like to do, if you can, is try and target that upper tier, but the nature of your phosphate is going to determine whether you can or can't, and in what ratios. So, Arianne is very fortunate. We have this igneous deposit, makes a very high purity concentrate, and we can target well over half of what's produced into that high margin PPA, with the rest being in the good quality liquids. So I think that as the LFP business moves forward, you're going to need more purified phosphoric acid. And in order to get more purified phosphoric acid, a lot of other companies that do have phosphate and the ability to build that out, in so doing, they will wind up producing a lot more fertilizer. And that's not necessarily something that you want to do. If I'm Morocco, for example, and I make my living selling phosphate to the fertilizer market, ramping up the purified market and producing a lot more fertilizer is going to kill the goose that lays the golden egg. Now, in the case of Arianne, we really can target this LFP market without having to produce and compete on the lower end products. So, I think that when guys like Rafe and Mark look at our company, understand our rock, understand what can be produced, they really see the opportunity and why we can target this fast growing market. So let's talk very briefly about the LFP, lithium iron phosphate battery. It is one of the battery chemistries that is out there. It's been out there for a long time. Now, here in North America, maybe it's really only over the last 18 months or so that we've come to understand it, as guys like Tesla and Ford and several other of the Western car makers, have said that they're looking to move over to the LFP. And the LFP has a lot of advantages. It's safer. There's no thermal runaways that this thing's going to burst into flames. Your charging cycles are quicker. You get many more cycles per life of battery, and the materials that you require are, easier to source versus, say, things like cobalt Even nickel is not an easy thing to mine in an environmentally friendly way. So you've got that. And what I think might surprise a lot of your listeners is that the LFP today is already over 30% of all batteries. So this isn't some niche technology, prove it to me, maybe it will work, maybe it won't. It is already there, and it is projected by the end of this decade to be the most prominent of all the lithium ion chemistries out there. And another thing that's going to push that demand for the LFP, as good as it is for automobiles in the transportation sector, it is ideal for energy storage. So as more and more people look to put solar panels on their roof or kind of get off the grid or less reliance on the grid, if you capture that energy, you have to store that energy. Because if you need energy when the sun's not shining, what are you going to do? So it's actually projected that within the next few years, the LFP for energy storage is actually going to exceed that for the transportation market. So the demand that's coming is absolutely huge. And that means there's a lot of potential. Demand for phosphate, as it is, grows every single year. Agricultural demand, population growth, etc. It historically has grown at 1.5% to 2%. Now, if you take a look at projections going out with, moderate growth in the LFP, that demand is going to go from about 2% annually for the phosphate concentrate that you require to 7%, 8% annually. So it might not sound like a lot, but if you have 5 years of 2% compound growth versus 5 years of 8% compound growth, 5 years out, that is an enormous, enormous difference. And that is what we are heading into. And I'll go one step further. And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to complicate this, but you will require the purified phosphoric acid for the battery market. And we've talked about in terms of phosphate what the growth is. But today, in terms of purified phosphoric acid, the material that you actually need to turn your phosphate into to use it for the LFP battery, that market today is about 950,000 tons a year, maybe 1 million tons. If you look at projections today, you're going to need an additional 1 million to 1.25 million tons. Okay, so we need to understand this. This isn't a matter of demand growing, doubling, quadrupling. This is a matter of overall supply needs to double. We need to build facilities. This isn't demand. This is supply. Someone is going to have to build this out. And again, I think where Arianne can be a big winner in this is because of the nature of our phosphate, we can really target that PPA market. So I think this is going to be big. And I'll add on one last factor. I'm sure a lot of your viewers, they do watch the battery space, critical materials, and they see that the West is starting to get serious in terms of the stuff comes out of China. We need our own sources. We need to integrate our supply chains. And with that, there is really a push to get these materials from friendly jurisdictions. Your viewers need to know that today, over 90% of all LFPs come from China. So as the West looks to get serious, we've seen programs like the Inflation Reduction Act, the Defense Production Act. Canada here, we've definitely seen financial incentives being put in place to build this stuff and source the materials here. So as I started by saying, Arianne, we are amongst the world's largest, amongst the world's purest, ideal for these LFPs, fully permitted, and here in North America. So our ability to answer this market that is going to be needed, I would say that we have an inside track, and at the end of the day, I think what both Mark and Rafe see is it's Arianne that can be a big player in answering this. For me, I'm very happy corporately. We have a lot of ongoing discussions. It was really only in March that we had announced definitively that our stuff does work in batteries, that it has met spec from a couple of the battery companies that we work with. And that certainly acted as a catalyst in discussions. So corporately, I'm very happy. I have to say, the stock's a bit of a head scratcher to me. I know you don't bring in too many leaders of companies that will sit here and say, oh, our stock is wildly expensive. But, today, our market cap, US dollars, is well, I'm going to keep this in Canadian dollars. We're sitting at about a $65-70 million Canadian market cap. As I had said earlier, we've spent $100 million. Anyone today that is looking to get into a greenfield phosphate project, took us 10 years, $100 million on what is arguably a world-class asset. That's what someone else is going to have to go through. We're already there. And so an investor today can, in essence, come in on this company at a value of less than replacement cost and get the comfort that some pretty knowledgeable guys, seem to think that there's a big opportunity here. I think that really the missing piece here is, phosphate is the Rodney Dangerfield of commodities. It just doesn't get any respect. The fact that you will not be able to feed yourself without it, you would think would be enough for people to pay some attention to it, but that's not. So along comes batteries. And, we've seen all the hoopla around lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite. And I'm not saying that that's not deserved, but if you look at the valuations on those companies and those early stage exploration companies, they're multiples of where Arianne is. And I get it. No lithium, no LFP battery. But guess what? No phosphate, no LFP battery. So I think that a lot of the big guys have done. We've seen big deals in the space with lithium companies and nickel. I think that these battery guys are now coming along and doing their homework on phosphate, and they're going to see these things that I've talked about. I don't think the car companies want to be in the fertilizer business. So ultimately, I think they're going to want to do deals with guys that can provide them phosphate solely for their use. So, we'll see where it plays out.
So you answered most of my last question I had for you, which I'll still follow it up. But one thing you just said to me is, I think is clear. If you bought into lithium plays for the battery part, then you have to be buying into for the phosphate part. It doesn't make any sense because one can't work without the other. So here's the last part that I just wanted to ask you. I was going to ask you generally, where were governments and all in this because of all the critical minerals, the fact that, like you said, comes all from China. But correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but I thought I read something where Quebec in particular has really put their hands on and recognized these critical mineral needs. Where does, if that is true, where do they fall in terms of phosphate since this is in their backyard?
That's a great question, and you're right. Quebec, I would say, has definitely been the forefront of moving the battery business forward. Has been very open to investment and supporting investment. We've seen deals here with General Motors. I think that was announced about 4 months ago. Ford recently, maybe about 4 weeks ago. So the government is definitely there to advance critical minerals battery initiatives. I should mention that the government of Quebec currently owns about 6% of Arianne, and certainly the fact that our phosphate can be used in batteries, we feel very comfortable that they will be there to support whatever initiatives we find ourselves in with a partner on the battery side.
Well, this is the way I explained it. I wasn't going to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. If I was still in the business of advising people, what I tell them is buy the shares, put it in your drawer, and maybe at Christmas, open it up. And you might even get Christmas in July one time. It's just something it's going to be this. And if you're successful, it's going to be here the next day. It's not going to be something that's working up as expiration more and more finds. It's going to go from standing at home plate or on first base to third base or back around the plate. And that's what I think how you got to approach it. That's my personal view. It's biased, but it's my view.
And look, I think that that's a very fair statement. Look, my pedigree, my background is in the small and mid-cap. Progression is a little bit of news, some good drilling, and then you go from there. So there's a constant flow of news. For better or for worse, we are done with all of that. It is drilled out. Our metallurgy is proven out. Collaboration agreement with the First Nations, permits, a couple of offtakes, like that is all done. So, I think what we are looking to accomplish in Arianne now is to cut the deal, a partner on the downstream PPA plant, or a final deal to get the mine built. And so, I don't think investors today that there's going to be some news next week and a little more minor news 2 weeks from now and what have you. I think at this point, our plan is to approach and put together that comprehensive deal, one announcement, one and done. And so again, today, look, our published NPV on the project is $1.9 billion NPV US, and so we've got a $50 million US market cap. So asymmetric is the word that comes to mind.
Well, I say this and I not want any indication. I don't know anything, but what the first thing that came to my mind to end this conversation is, man, some entrepreneur and smart billionaire running some electric vehicle company. This makes a lot of sense for them. Anyway, Ryan, thank you. Again, I just want to repeat, this is the type of story. It's just one more step. Now, that step doesn't happen, it don't happen. But if it happens in a huge, huge way. Thank you for all your time, Brian.
All right. Thank you, Peter.